This is Jim Dale of Shiloh Kahal, and I'm going to do a quick intro here because I just need to apologize first off. I set out to make a short video, and it did not work out to be a short video, our video, and I'm just sorry. It's just the information leads me there. But let me tell you what the objective is, in case I don't successfully do it at the beginning of the video that I have not yet proved. My objective here is more of the discussion that when we take the evening to evening, the sunset to sunset approach to a 24-hour day, the 24-hour day beginning calendar day, beginning in the evening of the night of the day before, starting in the evening at sunset. When you take that approach, and that approach opposed to starting the calendar day with the sunrise on that day, because those are the two things I'll be comparing. Sunrise, which I think is correct, the calendar day is measured from sunrise, runs through the day, through the evening, through the night, through the twilight period of the morning, to the sunrise, ends the day with the sunrise, the next day begins, juxtaposed against the evening to evening approach, which starts at the end of the previous day light, like on the 13th, you're going to be going through the daylight, then the day of the 14th starts at sunset of that day, at the end of that day. And so the very first part of all those days are going to be, first we're going to have evening, sunset, and then evening, then night, then morning, twilight, then we have the day. The last thing to happen is the daylight period. The first thing to happen is the evening and then the nighttime. And I'm just going to say that is taking a square peg and cramming it into a round hole, and people keep trying to do it, and that comes from that square peg is given to us by the understanding we've had from the Jews. The whole point of this video is to just demonstrate that we are trying, when you are taking that approach, you are taking a square peg to cram it into that round hole. And I'm saying that the daylight hours, sunrise to sunrise, is a round hole to go into a round peg. That's my objective here. So with that, I'll start the video. Sorry for the redundancy. Sorry for the group. Hello, everyone. This is Jim of Shiloh Kahal, and need to do another part, an effort to clarify a couple of positions that I took when making When Does a Day Start Part 2, utilizing Sean Griffin's work. Well, it ended up being a very long video because I commented throughout the entire video that Sean made. But in this one, I want to try to make it shorter and more succinct and address what I think are the most important elements and parts of the whole discussion and the reason why we're talking, why it even matters when we start the day. And I guess what started me again in this is I was just reached to the book of Exodus and read the first, got to chapter 12, and it just opened up the entire thought process for me again. And so with that, I want to go ahead and start. And let me go ahead and start with, let me make sure everybody understands. The issue is there are at least two competing ideas of when a day starts. And I don't intend to chase all of them, only the two that seem prevalent to me. When I became a follower, when I realized I was Israel and decided it was important for me to keep Shabbat, Sabbath, the initial and early guidance I received was, okay, yes, but it starts Friday evening at sunset, and you keep it from sunset on Friday evening to sunset on Saturday evening, which was strange, but I figured everybody that I was new to it all, and I just figured everybody knew what they were talking about. And that's how we tried to celebrate it. But it has come, and I'll just say in passing, hopefully in passing, that if you watch some of my other videos, you realize that this instruction that the church is receiving from the Jews that they receive when they start trying to emulate the Jews, with the idea that the Jews know what they're talking about when they're trying to keep Torah. Where does that originate from? Well, I contend that this whole discussion of evening to evening began when they began. Um, it started when they began keeping the Babylonian-based calendar. I contend that they began keeping the Babylonian-based calendar when Antiochus Epiphanes came to power and deposed the last of the Zadokite priests, Onias the third. And that whole argument, the reason that he was deposed and replaced with Hellenistic priest, had to do with, I'm sure it was much larger than just the calendar, but the calendar was part of it. The calendar, you know, Judea was part of the Greek Empire, and they wanted the Greek Empire, all of the Greek Empire, to be working on the same time schedule, so and the same calendar. Well, they weren't going to accommodate the calendar that Judea was keeping. They wanted Judea to accommodate the calendar that they were keeping, which couldn't be done. The Zadokite priesthood could not do that. Legitimate priests could not do that because they were charged with keeping the Moedim. And keeping the Moedim is entirely dependent upon keeping the correct calendar that Yahuwah, our Elohim, gave us. So I contend that we began with the Hellenistic priests that came in and replaced the Zadokite priests at the time of Antiochus. And part of what they did was manyfold, but one of which was the institution of the Babylonian-based Greek calendar. And that would have been around 175 BC. So from 175-ish BC all the way up to 0 BC and 30 AD, when all of these events are, the events of the, crucifixion week are happening in 27 to 30 AD. So 200 years later, 200 years. So my point is that, let me finish that thought, because there are some who think that they began keeping the Babylonian calendar once they went to Babylon in, what would that be, 586, and then they returned in 536. And when they came back, they brought the Babylonian calendar with them, which is suggestive that they and the Zadokite priesthood were keeping the Babylonian calendar throughout the last half millennium before Christ comes, from 500 BC up to at least 70 AD. Well, I can't buy that. I just don't think there's too much evidence that is not the way that the Zadokite priesthood is keeping it. And if what I also contend is that the Dead Sea Scrolls that come from the caves of Qumran, which would be the caves of Bethabara, these are the libraries. This is the library that the Zadokite priest, after they're being deposed from the priesthood, and they went and formed their compound, their meeting place in the land of Bethabara, in the area of Bethabara, the northwest corner of the Dead Sea. When they went there, they took their writings, their books. So and then when all of the things happened in 66, 67, 68 to 70 AD, as Rome not conquered, they'd already conquered, but when they were destroying Jerusalem, destroying the Jews and kicking them out, kicking all of the Yehudim out of the land of Yehuda, which is Judea. So kicking the Jews out of Judea, or all of Israel out of Judea. And 66 to 70. So when all this was happening, it was affecting the folks who were living in this compound, also known as the Way, maybe. And they would have hidden their scrolls, their scriptures, their library in the caves in an effort to preserve them and protect them and keep them, it's a good thing they did, because by the time Rome got done, the church got done, Greece got done. By the time they all got done, everybody was trying to destroy the scriptures of the Yehudim, the scriptures of Israel. And had this not been preserved, there's just history we would not have known. So this is my contention. But let me just state again that when Christians are turning to the Jews, we are turning to folks who have incorporated not just the Torah, but the Talmud, the oral traditions that have become Talmud. And they've incorporated it. And part of what they've incorporated is this whole calendar and this idea of an evening to evening. So all that to just say that many are contending that the day for a day that starts in the evening and runs to the evening. I have since, and continue to contend for that. I have since bought into, and if you were to watch my When a Day Starts, I've bought into the idea that the concept that the day starts when it seems natural to start, not at midnight or 12:01 a.m. like Rome wants to tell us in the Gregorian calendar, but at daybreak, at the sun coming up of a day that initiates the day. So until the day breaks, you have the night from the previous day until the sun breaks the horizon and comes up, and when it does, you've entered a new day. So, though we have some things to work out here that I think we need to define as we keep discussing what we're going to do. So I have up Sean Griffin's. This is from his video that he did that I utilized in my second part of When a Day Starts. But I've paused it here so we could capture this because this is a good visual. It explains his position, which is, I'm going to say, the standard position or the common position, and he argues for it probably as good or better than most would. But let's break down what he's saying to us here, and then what we need to what we need to do to define some of these things. Well, first of all, he contends that the day starts in the evening, and he shows, if you're looking at this screen, it shows that he's defined this whole screen as one 24-hour day. And let me say that he contends that there are different, when you say day, it can mean different things in our language. And I agree with that, and we will come back to that. But one of his first definition here is that a day is a 24-hour period of time. I think that's important to know because we've got to remember it's 24 hours. So when we talk about what he's getting ready to share with us, a transitionary time, we have to keep that in mind. So let's go down to show what he says is occurring in a day. So basically, in the evening here, if you can see this yellow, he's got this, in yellow it reads, evening transitionary time between calendar days. So he's pointing, and then there's a yellow arrow here pointing to the 6 to 10 p.m. part 1 area, which he includes in the 12 hours of night. So basically he's saying there's a transitionary time here at this 6 p.m. And he says all of this, he doesn't say it right here, but in his argument, he would say all of this belongs to the next day. So let's use the 14th of the first month, which would be Passover, as our day to have this discussion of days. He would say that the 14th would begin at 6 p.m. in the evening at the close of the 13th. Let me pull my calendar over and show you what that means. So here is Pesach, if you can see it here, and here is the 13th. If you have an evening to evening, as he's contending, all day long here is the 13th, but at 6 p.m. on this day, we begin the 14th. So that when we wake up, and I'll come back and show it to you again, when we wake up in the morning, we're still on the 14th, and we'll remain on the 14th until the transitionary period in the evening that he talks about again. I'll come back to this calendar. So, but what I think we need to do here is define what we mean by transitionary period, because most of us think that there's a moment in time that the day changes. In other words, I would just say historically that has been sunset. I know that that's how I've always envisioned it. I think that's probably how most people envision it, that the day ends when the last vestige of the sun disappears. And once it's gone, then we've transitioned from the day There's a little bit of daylight. That's one day. No, not daylight. I meant to say sun. A little bit of sun above the horizon is the day before. It disappears and you can't see the sun anymore. You're in the new day. That's the transitionary time. And that would be instantaneous, even though we don't necessarily register it that way. It would be instantaneous where it would stop. You can't see the sun anymore, and you've transitioned into the day. And I think we need to do that because that's instantaneous and momentous. It's just instantaneous. If we have any longer of a transitionary time, we're moving into the 24-hour periods, and and we're going to have to decide to which day then the transition belongs. It gets very complicated if you move past a transitionary time. But the way he has illustrated this, it's not clear. When he says a transitionary time, does he mean 6 to 10 p.m.? There is a period of time, and we're going to get into it, called twilight, when the sun goes down and we start daylight. Does he mean that's part of a transitionary time? I really don't know for sure what he means because I didn't hear anywhere, or I don't recall hearing that he defined what he means by transitionary time, other than it is the movement taking place in the evening from one day to the next, but he didn't define how long that takes. If I had to surmise, I would say that he would buy into the idea that it's instantaneous and it takes place when the sun sets. I think because that's what most people do. But if he does mean a transitionary time, he would have a lot more to explain. And when he starts, as he says in his video, hopefully this is making good sense to you. And if he keeps explaining the truth, it will all make sense to somebody. When I'm saying I just disagree with his idea of what the truth is, I think that the truth makes much more sense if you don't keep trying to manipulate into this evening to evening period of time. So let's presume then that he means moment. Well, actually, we don't have to presume anything. Let's just start defining a few things. First of all, let me go and grab some definitions of evening. So here is Merriam-Webster's definition of evening, and I think most of us would kind of tend to embrace it because it's colloquially anyway become the way we understand evening because it's a period of time. They define it as the latter part, if you can see this, the latter part and close of the day and early part of the night. So it's not a moment in time, it is a period of time. And then B, chiefly southern U.S. Afternoon. It says B, chiefly U.S., southern U.S. and midland U.S. afternoon, I guess. I'm not sure. Maybe they're saying that they are in those areas that I don't know. I don't know what they're trying to do here. I can only surmise. Then C is the period from sunset or the evening meal to bedtime. And I think most of us would embrace that too because we talk about evening as this period of time where it's all starting, the day's waning, we've come home from work, we've made dinner, and then we have this evening, we have our evening lineup of entertainment, which is the third part, this period of an evening's entertainment where we experience what we call evening and this period of time when we're all gathering together, usually family time, entertainment, TV, whatever you do, until night you go to bed and then that's night. That would be a pretty, I think, reasonable and common understanding of evening, and it's a whole period. Well, I don't think we can say that this whole period of time would be the transitionary time. But you could take what he's shown here, this 6 to 10 p.m. part 1, as the whole evening in colloquial definition of evening. Okay, so let me go back. I've just gone to a search engine. I use Startpage, but you can use Google or wherever you want to. And I've pulled up, definition of evening. Somewhere here they've indicated evening. The first thing they give me as a definition is the period of time at the end of the day, usually from about 6 p.m. to bedtime. That is their definition that just comes up colloquially. I shouldn't say that. I don't really know. They have another adverb in the evening, every evening. Okay. But this would tend to, I say, this looks a lot like the Merriam-Webster definition of evening. It's a period of time, at the end of the day, before you go to bed and before you hit night. But let's go over here to here we have them showing a picture with the sun headed down towards the horizon. And Probably it's not as bright during this period of time. And this is, this is the Wikipedia definition of evening. Let me open that up. So according to Wikipedia here, if you can see, I'm going to read this section here. It reads like this: evening is the period of a day that begins at the end of afternoon and overlaps with the beginning of night. It starts when the sun is close to the horizon and overlaps both twilight and night. The exact times when evening begins and ends are subjective and depend on location and time of year. It may be used colloquially to include the last waning daytime shortly before sunset. Close that page. Get back to the definition. And that makes sense. But again, it's a period of time. It's a transition. And I guess all that makes sense. But I think they introduce this idea of twilight, which becomes important to us as well, because we need to define twilight. Because as of this moment, we do not have a period of time defined for us. But I would tell you in scriptures, when we're talking about this Pesach, we're to, slaughter the lamb or goat in between the twilights, between the evenings, but between the twilights. And evening becomes, I think, as we look at these definitions of evening, it can be more confusing than using the term twilight here. Let me just go to the definition of twilight and I'll explain a little more here. So let's look up, I'm not going to go to Merriam-Webster. I'm just going to stay with this definition of twilight. And I'm going to use, if you can see this, I'll describe it for you. We have this definition, and if it's Wikipedia's definition, here, let me go here real quick and see if the picture is. It is here. So let me just open up Wikipedia and we'll define from here. If you can see this picture to the right, we have a picture. This part here where it's blue, like sky blue, during the day, sky blue. Then we have this period of time, and then they show this black line and this horizon here. And really, this point right here is where they're showing that the sun goes down. Here is the sunset. They're showing us the sunset across here. And this is where the sun goes down. But then we have this period of time where we have what we call twilight. The sun has gone down, but we have light. And let's see how they define that. Twilight is daylight illumination produced by diffuse sky radiation when the sun is below the horizon. In other words, you can't see the sun anymore. But as sunlight from the upper atmosphere is scattered in a way that it illuminates both the Earth's lower atmosphere and also the Earth's surface. Twilight also may be any period when this illumination occurs, including dawn and dusk. And I think that's important because we have this period of time happening twice a day. We have it happening at the end of night, between the night where night becomes day, and we have it where day becomes night. And we do have an overlapping of calling these periods of time evening, but I think it's more appropriately called twilight when evening especially has a colloquial end of the daylight period of time. Everybody kind of knows that's what it is. If we say evening and refer to it in the morning, it gets confusing to us. Although technically, the way it's used in scripture, that would be appropriate, I guess. But twilight saves you that confusion because you have twilight. Everybody understands twilight in the evening, but they also understand twilight in the morning. Because the way it works in the morning, you would have this period of time where we start getting the diffused sunlight. It begins to radiate and show light in the sky and light on the earth before the sun crests the horizon and we get the first glimpse of the sun. That's the twilight period of time. And then there is a further definition of twilight. They have astronaut. If you can see this, I'll pull it up a little bit. Let's see if this gets bigger. I wish I had done this. Actually, let me go back. Let me go back real quick. And I'm going to do the same thing to this. Okay, so this is what I was just trying to describe to you. But if you can see on the screen here now, I'll re-describe it. Here's the horizon. The sun is up. The sun is up. It's gone through the day. This is daylight period of time. But here's the sun hitting the horizon. And here they're showing us the sunset across this line. Once the sun has crossed the horizon and disappears, you can see it's below the line here. It's gone past the horizon. You no longer see the sun, but you have this period of twilight, this period of time where the light's being diffused, and we can see in the sky, we can see color, we can see sunlight, sunlight. We can see things, and we can see things on Earth. We can see still. It's not dark. But then when we hit dusk, it's the period of time where the light also leads. If you're a believer in the globe, the Earth is rotated far enough past that you get none of the sunlight coming through. And if you believe in a flat Earth, the sun has moved off far enough that you're just not, the sunlight has moved away from you. Either way, it doesn't really matter. It's the same outcome. You have this period of dusk where it becomes night. According to Sean, and let me see if I can get back to his imagery. According to Sean, this twilight period is taking place here because this 6 p.m., and I'll show you in a moment, somewhere around 6 p.m. is the sunset. And then we have this twilight period of time that does actually take place somewhere, probably doesn't last all the way to 10 p.m., which, we'll talk about it in just a second in Jerusalem. But we have the twilight period starting at 6 p.m. So is he saying the transitionary period is the sunset? Or maybe even in the time just prior to the sunset, because that's included in the colloquial definition of evening. But even if we started with sunset, and he's saying at 6 p.m. is the sunset period of time, we have this diffused twilight. Is the diffused sunlight, which is twilight, is that part of the transitionary time? I don't think that's what Sean is saying. But we need to be clear. I need to be clear, at least in this video, and hopefully Sean will be more clear in the future when he really means we're transitioning from one day to the next. Made it even bigger. Okay, so now when we're talking about twilight, and this will become important in just a moment because this should be part of, let me open up this screen, because they break twilight into 3 different versions of twilight, because here they're measuring, let me see if I can give me a second here, because this is morning. Let's see what happens. Here's sunset. I didn't realize this in the previous picture. So here's sunrise. This is the twilight I was describing to you before, the twilight that. Let me refine this one more time, because this period of time is the sun coming up. We have twilight. Forgive me. I'm not going to undo what I just did, because that is one definition, but I am realizing how they're doing this now, because we have this period. This is the dark period of time, and we have this dawn. I wish I'd seen this earlier. Dawn. Dawn is the period of time where twilight begins. We call it dawn, but colloquially we call it morning. But it's dawn. The sun is not up, but daylight begins, and we begin to see things. And then here's the sun just before it rises, and then we get to this period of time where the sun has come up. And then we have the period of, if you can follow my mouse here, I'm just kind of following it around. We have this daylight period of time as the sun comes up. Here would be noon up here. I'm up at the top of the screen, and then it comes on down and it starts working its way. Here we're colloquially start getting into evening about this period of time, and I'm sure it's not as bright as it was while it was sunlight up here and noontime type stuff, but here we are, and the sun is going down, and here is where we are watching the sun go past the horizon, and then we have the diffused daylight again. No sun, but light. It's light up in the sky, keeping it all light, and then we hit dusk where we move into night. So going around this one more time, here's what I'm going to use this. I'm going to come back to this picture. Let me quickly first go and finish this conversation, because we have different forms of twilight period. So they're using the sunrise section of this, but they have this astronomical twilight, which is the darkest part of twilight, closest to the night, and the same will be true in reverse in the evening. And then we have a nautical twilight, where it gets the middle part of twilight. Then we have civil twilight, which is the brightest part of the twilight. So they're defining this, and you're going to see it in a moment on Time and Date where they're defining this. Let me see if I can go back to let me see if I can close this. Okay, so they're not really, okay, so here's the evening. here's the evening. This is what happens as we come to, we first have as the day closes and the sun sets, we first have the civil twilight, then the nautical twilight, then the astronomical twilight, then nighttime. So that's how they're breaking it down. Let me come back to this picture. See if I can make it bigger even. Okay, and let's follow. Let me go back. Let's follow what Sean is saying. Let me go back to Sean real quick. And he's saying we have the first part of the day will be this period, and the transitionary period of time starts in the evening, and I'm saying it starts in the morning. So now let's go back to our video here. So Sean would say that the day starts right here. Actually, he could be talking about a transitionary time somewhere between, anywhere in here, starting up in this period of time to this period. But somewhere in here, we have to change the day. So going back to our calendar date of the 14th, he's saying that all day long, we have, actually, yeah, all day long, we're going to start with the 14th. So all day long during this period of time, this would be the 13th of the first month. So the sun has come up, but we're midway then through the day 13 of the calendar. And then as we approach this period of time, somewhere in here, we're going to change from the 13th to the 14th. This is very important that you understand this for future discussions. What Sean and all who would embrace an evening to evening day, at some point we either need a transition time, which would erode our 24-hour day, or we just need a transitionary literal time. I would say, and for the argument, so I can narrow the conversation down, we're going to pick a time. We're going to say that the day literally transitions at sunset. As the sun is starting to go beyond the horizon, it's not. It's still day 13. It's still day 13, and then suddenly it disappears, and you can't see it anymore. You still see twilight, but you don't see it anymore. Boom, you just went to the 14th. I think that's what Sean is saying. But no matter what, this would be a close argument to what has to take place now. So we just entered at sunset the 14th day, which is Pisa. So we just entered Pisa according to Sean. And let me pull my calendar back. This means that this blue horizon here would align with this day 13 here that's taking place. And this twilight, this sunset and this twilight period is taking place here on the 13th. It's taking place around 6 p.m. ish, and I'll go to time and date in a minute and we'll show you. But the 14th has started here, and it's illustrated on this picture. So then we have this period of time called twilight. Now we do have okay, let me keep going, but then I'll come back to these twilights because this is a really good illustration. I need to get this saved. So then we have this period of twilight. First we have the civil twilight, then we have the nautical twilight, then we have the astronomical twilight, and then we have night. I'll be coming back to this in the discussion when we get into Exodus 12:6 and 12:18, Jubilees 49. Then we have this period of night. I would say, going back to Sean, he's going to call this the first part of the night from 6 to 10, probably passes. In fact, if you get into the third part, you've got all of the twilight in the first part. And if this is the third, and this would say this would be 10 o'clock, if you can see, I've got, hopefully you can see this video and see this. This would be from 6 to 10. Here's the third part here to break this into third. This would be his first part, but it includes nighttime. And then we have in the second part, it is all night. It's all night. And in the third part, we have the twilight beginning. So in the third part of the night at this time of the year, now at a different time of the year, it could be that we would actually see where this day, the night is the shorter period of time, and this is a full 12-hour period of time. Well, this whole period of time would be, in fact, this might even would be at the equinox, the period of time where we have equal daylight. Probably is when I think about it that way. But there will be periods of time where we have shorter periods of day and longer periods. We could get into this. But we have the third part of the night that is here, and in this picture would include the twilight of the dawn. We have dawn, twilight, all part of the third part of the night. All of this belongs with the third part of the night. I'm going to have to go back to Genesis as well. Yeah, I'm gonna have to go back. Genesis in this. Okay, I love this picture. Okay, so to Sean though, we are in the 14th, and we are in the now. When the sun rises here, we're still on the 14th, and we're going to be on the 14th all the way through till the end of the day. But at sunset now of the day, it's going to end. So let's go back to our calendar. So to use the calendar, we're showing we've entered the evening, the twilight period of time. We've gone into night, and we've crossed over, and we're coming. And then around 6 a.m. on the 14th here will be our twilight and the sun coming up. And then only until the sun sets do we have the 14th. Because when the sun sets again, now we've entered into the 15th day, which is what he's saying we're eating Passover on. I'm saying that doesn't make any sense, because it just can't make sense in light of all of. There's only one passage that is definitive, and I think I'll explain it when I get there. Um, I'm not sure this is going to be a short video after all. Um, so there's only one passage, 40 Jubilees 49, 1 and 2, that is suggestive that we're eating Passover on the 15th. Everything else is suggestive that we're eating Passover on the 14th. So let me go back. So I just described this graph, this illustration in his economy, but let's just describe it from mine. So I'm saying, and I think it's evident, that we have a sunrise. And as soon as the sun breaks the sky, we have a new day. So all of this would be the first part of a day. And we are seeing the day happening here and the day going along. And then we have the sun going down, and we have this evening, but it's all part of the same day. Then we have this twilight period, and then we have this dusk, and then we have nighttime, and then we have twilight, dawn, and then we have sunrise again, and then we start a new day. So for me, the 14th starts when the sun comes up on this on so when on this calendar. I'm saying the sun, this day doesn't start over here at the end of the 13th. It starts when the day comes up. After nighttime has come and gone, the sun rises, and we start day 14, and we are moving around here. So we're on day 14, day 14, day 14, day 14, day 14. Then we have this sunset. Sorry, smaller again. We have the sunset, and then we have the twilight, then we have dusk where it goes night, and then we have night in that period of time. Okay. So I'm going to stay here just for a second and just illustrate again that we need to define when the day starts. What is Sean's transitionary period? He's either saying starting over here to go down to there, but I think most of us will say it's sunset. Sunset, sun goes down. Most of us understand. And even if that's not what Sean means going forward, that's what we're going to use. It is sunset. And that's when the day starts, and then it runs through the night, then lasts through the night first, and then through the day lastly. I say, and I think most of scripture say, and many of us are arguing now, that the day begins once the sun rises, and the first thing we have is daylight, and then we have twilight, night, twilight, and that's the day. Okay. And now, before I move off into the scriptures that we're going to utilize this for, which for me, it's going to be Exodus 12, verse 16, and then starting in 18, and Jubilees 49. We're going to go and break those down. But before I do, I want to just illustrate a few things that we'll have to come back to, but I want to illustrate them for you now, too. Because one of the passages say that the lamb or the goat, the Pesach, the Passover, is to be slaughtered on the 14th between the evenings or between twilights. So what does that mean? If in my these are the two twilights. This is the evening twilight. This is the morning twilight. In my economy, you would have a twilight that has ended. So from here, we're between the twilight. So the Pesach have to be slaughtered during the daylight periods of this time before the twilight. And if you're going to go evening, and you'd have to call the sunrise, and and you could potentially call the sunrise evening, but we're not used to doing that. We're used to calling the sunset evening, but we're not used to calling sunrise evening. If you say between the evenings, which is in some of our scriptures, it's a little more confusing, but it's still between this, this. It is possible that you have between the twilights and between the evenings in this darkness, but we're going to see that we're commanded to be eating in this period of time. This is the time. So I think most of us would agree that the lamb needs to be slaughtered at this point, sometime during the day between these two twilights. It is possible because we're not supposed. There's one passage that says, there needs to be no daylight left. I think it's in 49, Jubilees 49, where there's not supposed to be any sunlight, which would be down here. So are we saying we need to slaughter the lamb here? I don't think so. I think we have issues with either the translations themselves or our understanding of the translations, which is a problem with all translations. They're not all translated correctly, it's a limitation to us in all of our scriptures, even the book of 66. It's a problem, and we have to factor that into what we do. We try to give as much room that the scriptures are accurate to the point that we know that when they were given to whoever, they were given to Moshe, which is most of our scriptures that matter to us, Moshe, David. When it's given to them, it's given accurately, the inerrant word of God, and that they wrote it down, we're sure, without error. It's inerrant. So, but from the next translation forward, we get men, and are we assured that they don't have problems? As we, even in the Dead Sea Scrolls, we see problems with scribes and translations where they're rescribing. We get men involved in it, so we have problems. And until Yahweh comes back or Yahushua comes back, we're going to have issues with this, and it's just part of our problem. So we have limitations. We can call Jubilees scripture, and I do. It's as much scripture as Genesis is, because we got the same problem with Genesis and Leviticus and Exodus that we have with Jubilees. We're going to have some areas where we're just thinking they didn't translate this correctly. And I don't want to use it to excuse anything away. It needs to be, I'm a believer in going through problems and not around problems. If the translation says it, we need to deal with it and then come up with other potentials to where it could mean. And what is the preponderance of evidence? That's what I favor. We're going to have a scripture that says they are eating on the 15th at night in the 15th, Jubilees 1, 2. They're eating at this point in time. And that is pretty definitive. But it stands juxtaposed to all the other scriptures that are saying something else, that this is all part of the 14th still. We'll just have to factor that in, and you'll have to make your decisions. But I want to revisit Genesis. I'm not going to go there, but we all kind of know Genesis because we have in the description of days what we have. And if you go back to my first part, you would see this described by to be saved, more so than me. But this is what they're saying. What we have is Yahweh showing up on the scene and forming out of his whatever he starts with, and he begins, let there be light. Before even the sun is saying, let there be light. So he creates light, and it's created. And then let there be, whatever he does on that first day, the things he does on that first day. Well, to be saved, and I agree with it, everything we see described with his activity is taking place during this period of time where he has all of this activity. And then he says at the close, and then there was evening, and then there was morning, day 1. Well, those who are hanging on to the idea that we have an evening to evening, they're suggesting that they're forgetting that there's this description of all this activity up here before he makes the comment, then there was evening, and then there was morning. And they think that they forget all the work he just did, and they go straight to, then there was evening, and then there was morning, as though there was this evening to morning all the way down. I guess we're going to start here. Then there was evening, and then there was morning, day 1. So this would be evening to morning, day 1. And I guess, but if you really, really follow what is happening, you have all the activities of day 2, and then you have evening, night, morning. Then there was evening. He doesn't mention night, but he does say there was evening, and then there was morning, and this is morning, dawn to sunrise, this twilight period of time. So, and then we have day 2 activities. It is all these things that he does on day 2. Then we have evening, and then we have morning, day 2. I hope you can see this on this video. Then you have all the activities of day 3, and then we have evening, and then we have morning, day 3. The end of day 3, completes day 3. And then you have all the activity of day 4 when he's completing. First of all, day 2, going back to day 2, that's the expanse over the heavens, which is another, take all day to do that. On day 4 now, we've entered day 4 and we have all this activity. Now he's creating the sun. So we don't even at this point in time have a twilight sunrise, or at least not according to the way we understand it now. There was light, there probably was evening, and there was definitely morning, evening and morning, but did it include twilight at that point in time without the sun? I don't really know, because it's on day 4 that we see the day that the sun was created, which also then becomes day 4 becomes the first day of each year, because and the first day of each week, day 4 of the week, because that's when the sun was created. I'm so sorry. Day 4 does not become the first day of the week, but it becomes the first day of the year when we begin the year, because that's when the sun was created, and the year is then based upon 364 day. I know we need to deal with intercalary days and other things that we're all dealing with in our world today. But on day 4, he creates the sun and the moon and the stars and puts them in. But this is all daylight activity. Then we have probably, maybe the first time we have twilight, maybe, but we have this evening and we have morning, the end of day 4. And then we have day 5, all the activity of day 5. And then we have the evening twilight and the morning twilight, end of day 5. And then we have day 6 activity when man is created. Then we have evening, and then we have morning, end of day 6. And then we have the beginning of day 7. He's resting. We're on day 7. So we are beginning here. His rest begins, would be at this sunrise period of time. This is his period of rest. And then we have the evening, and then we have the morning, day 7. So that's the argument using Genesis, that we aren't, when we hear when there was evening, then there was morning. So it's not saying that evening comes first, because when you think that evening comes first, because that's what you're hearing in there, you skipped all the part where he talks about all the activity of that day that preceded that evening and that morning, and then completed the day. All right, that's Genesis. Let's go back to the scriptures that are at hand for us. Okay, forgive me. I forgot. I needed to cover a couple quick things and confirm a couple quick things before I move on. So the definitions I want to apply to our situation going forward. I don't really want to keep using Sean's transitionary time because it's not clear enough. I'm going to say that the day changes for everybody who holds to an evening to evening day. The day changes. The transition takes place at sunset. The sunset would be the new day. Twilight would belong to the new day. Both twilights would belong to the new day. And the twilight would be first, then night, then the twilight. All of that occurs before the daylight period of time of a new day in that economy. Having established that, let's go for a second. I want to go to time and date. Let me see if I can get it up quickly. Yeah, time and date. So this is a website you can go to where you can check sunrises and sunsets and just see. There's just a lot of information in here. But if we're going to use the sun setting as the time that we transition, or I mean, if you want to use a we are going to see the twilight periods here too. So let's okay. And so here we are in time and date, and I've selected where, again, you can check your sunrises and sunsets, and I've selected as our location of reference Jerusalem, Israel, which is, because that's where the focal point of all of this is, in the land of Judea, Israel, and Jerusalem in the land, and that's where we're measuring most of our time from. Now, if you're in a similar latitude, you'll experience, roughly the same periods of daylight and night as Jerusalem. But if you go north and south, you'll start experiencing differing, levels, amounts of sunlight and sunset. It's just different in different latitudes. But we're working from, in this discussion, Jerusalem. And let me also say that we're working from, I'm going to be selecting primarily I'm going to be selecting, selecting April 1st, but let me explain why we're going to use April 1 as our effective date. And it's because if we're going to use the, and I am going to use the Enoch-based calendar that it is apparent through, especially through the Dead Sea Scrolls, that the Zadokite priests were using at that time, and the calendar that many of us are working from today, which will always have the first of the year being the fourth day, and it's a 364-day year. So I really want to get into all of that. But what I will say is that in that calendar, the head of the year, which is the beginning of month one, always takes place somewhere around the equinox, where we have equal days. Um, and if that takes place around the equinox, that means the first of the year is happening somewhere around the 18th, 19th, 20th, 21st. That, when the days are equal according to. I know we have to get into intercalary in our world today because this is a 364-day calendar, but we're experiencing, at least in modernity, and for recordable history and reported history, we're experiencing a year, a year that lasts 365.2 something days. So we're having more days in a solar year that it takes a sun to get all the way around to back to the spring equinox. Um, but for our sake today, that's not our topic. What for our purpose today, we are going to show that the 19th was the head of the year in 2025, which would have been equal days roughly. But we have the Pesach doesn't happen until day 14 of that month. So we would be 14 years or 14 days past the equinox. So it'd be around 4-1, because that's what, if you can see what I'm circling here, this is the date on the Gregorian calendar, which would be 4-1. So that's what I'm going to use for our discussion. But in any given week, it could be, or any given year, it could be, earlier. It could be anywhere from really the 25th, maybe to the 8th, I guess. It doesn't matter, but the concepts will hold true either way. So here I am going back to time and date, and I've got April 1 up here. It's the first line here. Again, we're in Jerusalem, and this is what was happening on April 1 of 2025, if you can see it. So if you can see this line on April 1, the sun came up at 6:27 a.m. I contend the day began. The, the 1st of April began at 6:27 a.m. For those who are saying that that it's an evening to evening day, then this is halfway through the first day. We're halfway through April 1, the first day of April here, or the 14th day of the first month. And then the sun set at 6:58 p.m. So now that has meaning to me in my economy, but the next day doesn't begin until the sun comes up again at 6:28. So literally the second in my economy, April 1 begins at 6:27 a.m. if these numbers are accurate. April 2 will begin at 6:26 p.m. But for those who are observing evening to evening, we're halfway through here. In the way I observe, the sunset's important, of course, because we're ending the third part of the day here and entering the first part of the night, but we're on the same day. This belongs to this day. So the sunset of the first belongs to the first. If you were going sunset to sunset, the sunrise, this first part of the day belongs to the first, but this at 6:58 p.m., this actually belongs now to the 2nd of April. Kind of important to know, because this is exactly what you're experiencing, what you're saying. And then we go to the right. First of all, they're telling us daylight length. Okay, fine. But it's like 12 and a half hours of daylight now at this period of time as we're approaching the summer solstice. In the winter, after we hit the solstice, the days begin to shorten and we can get to shorter days too. But then they also start telling us about these astronomical, nautical, and civil twilights. If you remember from our discussion a few moments ago, astronomical is the darkest twilight, nautical is the mid twilight, takes place in the middle of the twilight period, and the civil twilight is the light period. This is the period of time where light appears and in the morning before the sun comes up, and where light appears in the evening after the sun has gone down. So astronomical twilight on the first, the sun was coming up at 6:27, if you can see what I'm circling here. But daylight began to appear an hour and a half earlier. It began to appear at 5:05 a.m. where we started seeing, it was dark still, but we started seeing the first vestiges of daylight before the sun comes up. Then you had nautical twilight beginning at 5:30. So an hour before the sun actually comes up, we're getting, we're getting that mid light of twilight. And then at 6:03 a.m. we get to civil twilight. So from 6:03 to 6:27 we have that lighter period. Let me go back to my picture if I can do it quickly. So basically what we're saying, here's the morning light. Here's, if you remember what we just said, the sun comes up at 6:27. So this is 6:27. Our astronomical twilight began at 5:05 p.m. Astronomical began at 5:05 p.m. Nautical twilight began at, what was it? It was 5:34 a.m. If I said p.m., I'm sorry, I meant a.m. 5:05 a.m. 5:34 p.m. a.m. became the nautical twilight, and then at 6:03-ish we got into the civil twilight. Let me see if I can get back here to Wikipedia and just confirm that what I'm saying here. That's so 5:05. This was 5:05. This was whatever that was. 5:05, 5:30-ish, roughly 6 a.m. and then 6:30 p.m. is when the sun. I keep saying p.m. I mean to say morning, a.m. So this is when the sun comes up. So this appears, what we're seeing, this picture appears here. This is the beginning of the astronomical at 5:05. The nautical begins at 5:34. The sun is not up, and the civil twilight begins at 6:03, and then the sunrise begins at 6:27. Beating it to death. I'm sorry. In the evening, in reverse though, then we have the sun setting at 6:58 p.m. This would be, this is just the end of the third part of the day and the beginning of the first part of the night for me, believing that the day started here at 6:27. But for those who believe it goes sunset to sunset, this is your new day. It suddenly begins. And the first thing you experience after 6:58, the sun has gone down, and you experience the civil twilight. You can see I've gone all the way over to the right. The civil twilight ends 25 minutes later and moves, the civil twilight where the sun is down, but we're getting good light in the sky. Civil twilight ends at 7:23, and then we have nautical twilight beginning at 7:23 and running until 7:52 p.m. And then we still have the astronomical twilight where we have some light in the sky, not much, and it runs from 7:52 to 8:22 p.m. So we have, in both of these occasions, we have roughly, if you look at this in the morning, this morning twilight lasted basically an hour and a half because it started at 5:05 p.m. and we had this twilight period lasted an hour and a half. Can't all be transition, can't be. So we can't call the twilight period the transition of time. It's forcing us back to the sunrise or sunset time. And if we go to the sunset, it's set at 6:58, and the astronomical twilight ended at 8:21. So it's not quite as long, but it's roughly as long. It's basically an hour and 24 minutes. I think that is 23 minutes, something like that. Again, that twilight period of time. So we'll finish up here. You get the idea. If you are going sunrise to sunrise, the day begins when it comes up here. The first thing we experience before the day begins would be this period of this astronomical twilight, nautical, all of this twilight begins before the new day begins. And it begins at 5:05. Sun begins to appear over here, but the day begins right here. In our picture over here, this is still the day before. This would be, in our case, it'd be the 31st of March, and it continues, even though the sunlight is beginning to appear in the sky, it's when this sun breaks this horizon at 6:28, whatever it was, that we now have the 1st of August or April. I'm sorry, and but keep in mind that that means we're halfway through the 1st of April for those who believe in a sunset to sunset. And I contend, in the way I'm repeating here, but just so that you get it, I contend that the day has begun here. Sunset is part of the same day, as is uh, the evening twilight period, the nighttime, the end of day twilight period, all belongs to the same day, the 1st of the night, all belongs to the 1st. All of this morning twilight that is coming up belong for the next day. Yeah, actually, it's not the next day, but all that morning twilight also belongs to the 1st. It isn't until the sun comes up that we move to the 2nd. But in the economy of Sean and those who believe it's sunset, only this period of time from 6:27 to 6:58 belongs to the 1st, because the first part of the 1st happened on the 31st as the sun went down. According to them, this begins April 2nd and includes all of the twilight periods. All right, so we're beating it to death. Let's take this information we have just accumulated and let's apply it to the scriptures we've got now. I'm sorry, maybe one more thing before we head off to the passages, because it comes up not so much in the Exodus and Jubilees passages, but it comes up in the discussion of the crucifixion week. And it won't necessarily be a lot of our conversation today, but it seems like a good time to discuss it. But when we start talking about the crucifixion of Messiah, we start talking about, the 6th hour, the 3rd hour, etc. And so what does that mean? Well, they are measuring from sun up. They're not measuring from, there is one passage, I think it's in John, where maybe they are, because they call the sunrise the 6th hour. And the only way to call the sunrise the 6th hour is if you've started at midnight, like they do in the Roman, Greco-Roman, I believe it is, the current Gregorian, the current calendars, where we start the day at 12:01 a.m. Only if you're measuring by that. And some might have been in that time because it's the Roman calendar, where they would measure it and say it's the 6th hour at sunrise. But generally speaking, when we're talking about what's happening in that day, we're measuring from sunrise. So the 3rd hour from sunrise is 9 o'clock. So sunrise would be roughly 6. Doesn't have to be exact, and clearly at that time of the year we saw that it would be more like 6:58 or something, a little later than 6 o'clock. But in the first 3 hours of the day, so the third hour would be the 3rd hour of that day. So it would be anywhere from 9 to 9:58 or whatever it works out to be, would be the 3rd hour. The 6th hour would have been, I guess the 3rd hour would be up here, right? The 6th hour would have been around noon. That's when he was crucified in the 3rd hour. What took place at the 6th hour? They measure something at the 6th hour, but that would be roughly midday. That would be noon, and then he died at the 3rd hour, or the 9th hour. So we have the 6th. So we have the 3rd hour here when he's being crucified. We have the 6th hour here at noonday, noon. And then you have the 9th hour when he died here around 3 to 4 p.m. So in what I will be saying as we speak, he's arrested at this point in time, and he's brought before Caiaphas and Ananias and those guys here in the twilight hours before the sun's coming up. This hour and a half period of time is taking place where he's being moved back and forth between Pontius Pilate, or Caiaphas to Pontius Pilate to Herod, and then back again. All of this is taking place apparently in roughly this twilight hour, because it's sunrise. He's now back at Pilate, where he's being, basically he's being turned over. Okay, take him away. Give you Barabbas instead. And then it takes him 3 hours to get from this point to where he's actually hanging, he's being put on the cross here and he's being hung here. So this is the twilight period of time taking place after his arrest, sometime here in the darkness. And then we have the period of time where this is also the period of time where Peter's denying him. This is the period of time where we're dealing with the morning coming up, and we got twilight periods, the shuffling between Caiaphas or Ananias and Pontius Pilate to Herod, back to Pontius Pilate again. Then we have him being sentenced, and then we have the crucifixion taking place up here in the 9th hour. Okay, so here we are. Sean has pulled up Exodus 12:6. I'm not exactly sure what version he's reading from. I prefer to read from, and let me see if I have it up. I prefer to read from, the Yah scriptures. I think they're both taken from the Masoretic text. They're translated from the Masoretic text, which would be Hebrew text, but transcribed and translated by the Masoretes, 900 years into this time. So around 900 or 1000 AD, that we're getting those texts. But they're all, because it's really historically been the oldest that we have, except for some of the Ethiopian texts that we've had. And except for the Septuagint, of course, which is older than both of these in their basis. But here it reads, if you were in the early part, before, in fact, you know what? Let me pull it over here because he just starts at 12:6. But I'm going to, in Yah scriptures, I'm going to start at a little bit earlier in that. So let's read the Yah scriptures, starting in verse 1. And Yahweh spoke to Moshe and to Aaron in the land of Mitzrayim, saying, this month is the beginning of months for you. It is the first of the month of the year. So this is that whole discussion. This would be the equinox. We are starting the month, the first part of the year, at the equinox, roughly the equinox period of time. Then verse 3, speak to all the congregation of Israel, saying, on the 10th day of this month, each one of them is to take for himself a lamb according to the house of his father, a lamb for a household. And if the household is too small for the lamb, let him and his neighbor next to his house take it according to the number of the beings, according to each man's need, make your count for the lamb. Let the lamb be a perfect one, a year-old male. Take it from the sheep or from the goats. And this is the verse that we get to. And you shall keep it until the 14th day of the same month. Then all the assembly of the congregation of Israel shall kill it between the evenings. So here in my version is not between the twilights, but between the evenings. Now let's go read what Sean has up. Sorry. Okay. So in his version, it reads, and you shall keep it, the Passover lamb, up until the 14th day of the same month, and the whole assembly of the congregation of Israel shall kill it in the evening. Now that's interesting because his version doesn't say between the evenings. His just says it shall kill it in the evening. So if we go back to our, if we go back to this, sorry, if we go back to our little illustration here, mine is saying between the evenings, which would be between the twilights, between these two. I know there are other versions that say something similar. His is just saying kill it in the evening. Well, what is the evening? Is it this twilight period? Is it that definition we were showing of evening, before, where it's this whole period of time, maybe even before the sun goes down? And I don't know for sure. I think the correct translation would be between the evenings, which means in the daylight period of the day. Now, looking at Sean's version here, it doesn't say emphatically that the whole assembly of the congregation of Israel shall kill it in the evening on the 14th. But it is implied, because what else would you say the 14th up here? And you shall keep it up until the 14th day of the same month. And then the whole assembly shall kill it in the evening. Well, let's read my version again. This is the Yah scriptures, and it says, "You shall keep it until the 14th day of the same month. Then all the assembly of the congregation of Israel shall kill it between you." So nobody really, until you start adding the confusion of evening to evening, nobody is understanding that differently, though, that the 14th is the day that you're killing this sheep or goat. You're killing the Pesach. But let's go to the calendar and look at what this means in what we said according to the day. If you if you can see this, this is Pesach, the 14th right here. If you're going morning to morning, sun up to sun up, like I am saying, you would be keeping the lamb from the 10th day here until the 14th, and then the sun comes up. And we've just gone past twilight, and the sun comes up. So now we're in, and then the next twilight to come will be the evening twilight. So we are to kill the lamb, according to my version, between these two twilights on the 14th, which would take place in the daylight hours then of this day, the 14th. According to Sean's version, you would kill it in the evening. So you would get to the evening, whatever that means to be, one of the definitions said maybe an hour before the sun goes down. And, then we have this hour and a half period of time where the sun has gone down, but we have twilight. And then we go to bed. Another definition says, well, the evening ends when you go to bed. But that night, none of these guys are going to bed. So that can't be the definition. So if also in John's version they're killing it here, but let's go back to Sean's understanding of the day. If Sean is saying that a day begins in the evening, well, the 14th day, if we go back to his version, the 14th day began over here, because this is when, at the end of the 13th daylight period of time, on the day of the 13th, the evening would have began here. The sun goes down here. Their day begins here. So the 14th begins here. If you're going to kill it on the evening of the 14th, you've got to do it over here. Because by the time you get to the evening, at the end of the 14th period day, the period of daylight, now you're into the 15th, which he argues for when it's all said and done. But then in his very version, they're having to kill the lamb over here, which we know can't. Pretty convinced that can't be the argument, can't be the case. So we have a problem immediately where he says that the day begins in the evening, because then the evening of the 14th begins it begins at the end of the daylight period of the 13th, before the night begins here, because all of this night begins the 14th. By the time we're waking up and the sun comes up, according to what Sean would be saying, we're midway through the 14th day. And when we get to evening, now we've transitioned over into 15th. So we would be having to kill the lamb. In this, if you're killing it in the evening, you're going to have to kill the lamb 15th. Or you're going to be killing it at the end of the day. It's a problem. It's a problem for me. Now, again, if you go between the evenings, you could still kind of work that a little bit into the I didn't mean to do that. If you could work it into the sort of work it into the evening to evening, because if you're going to do it between the evenings, you just need to know that you need to kill it once the sun comes up, after the twilight morning period of the morning, the sun comes up, and before the twilight period of time in the evening, on the 14th, you would kill it. But according to Sean, though, then to eat it, as we're going to get into, to eat it, you must then you're going to be eating it on the 15th. Now let's stay with the Hallelujah Scriptures, because I'm not sure he actually does it in his, but let's stay with the Hallelujah Scriptures. Okay, so you're to kill it between the evenings, and then they shall take some of the blood and put it on the two doorposts and on the lintel of the house where they eat it. Okay, so when do you do that? Do you do that between the evenings? Do you do that in the twilight hour, or do you do that at night? I don't know that any of that is necessary. In verse 7 here, it could be any of those times. It could be literally the daylight hours of the 14th. And in my economy, it could be the twilight hours, which is still the 14th if you go morning to morning, but it's now the 15th if you're going evening to evening. So if you're going to apply this on the 14th, you got to do it before the sun goes down. If you're going to apply it
in the twilight, and in the evening you're on the 15th already. And so and then if you wait till night, of course you're still in daylight in morning to morning. You're still on the 14th, so it doesn't really matter. None of it matters on the day morning to morning, but on the evening to evening day, 24-hour day, only if you do it before the sun goes down are you applying the blood on the 14th. Otherwise, you're applying it on the 15th at twilight or night. Either way, you're on the 15th. And they shall eat the flesh on that night, roasted in fire with unleavened bread and with bitter herbs they shall eat it. So if you're going daylight to daylight, then, sunrise to sunrise, then you would have, when you eat it that night, you are still eating it on the 14th. We've gone past, you're applying the blood across the doorpost and lintel, and you're eating it on the 14th. If you're going evening to evening at evening time, by the time you hit twilight and night, you're in the 15th already. Already. And potentially you're already in the festival of Matzah. And Passover's already ended before Passover ever occurs and before we eat the Passover meal. It makes no sense to me that you're already going into the 15th where the festival of Matzah, the Feast of Unleavened Bread, begins, because we've entered the twilight and evening hours here. We haven't even had the Passover yet. It makes no sense. Go back to scriptures. But they're to eat it. But there's no question they are to eat it that night. If they're killing on the 14th, then they are to eat during the daylight, either whether they between the daylight hours, between the evenings, or in the evening, even according to Sean's version, it's still, you're eating it that night. So once that evening has passed, now we're eating it that night. So it is clear that we're eating it this night. Whatever this period of time is, whether this is the 15th already down here or still the 14th, we're eating it this night into the second watches of this day here. Now, I would say the second and third watch of the night, the second and third parts of the night occur on this period of time, the way I'm talking, according to Sean's way of thinking, and in the sunset to sunset day, the second and third parts of the night are occurring over here on the 15th day. It's a problem. See, okay, then they get into some passages here. Do not eat it raw. Some instructions about how we're to eat it. But here's an important one. Verse 10, and do not leave of it until morning, and what remains of it until morning you are to burn with fire. Now, what is morning? In that, in what I was showing earlier, let's see if I can get to it. So what would morning be? Well, does it begin with dawn when the twilight begins to appear? Is this morning? I don't really know for sure. If it's similar to evening, it would be considered this would be the morning right here. And just like they're describing in the evening, maybe an hour in colloquialism, when they start talking about what could be included in the evening, maybe an hour before the sun goes down, and then all of this period of time, and even into the night is evening. I suppose in the same manner that you have all this period of time here, maybe just a little bit before the twilight begins, and then all this period of twilight is morning, and then maybe an hour after twilight is all morning, potentially. And all of that kind of fits when we are talking about in the sunrise to sunrise day. It really almost doesn't matter. But whatever is in the morning you are to burn it with fire. Now, if you're going sunrise to sunrise, when the morning comes up, when the sun rises, you're in the 15th. So I think it needs to be either burned, if it remains until morning when the sun comes up, potentially you are burning it after the sun comes up. And then there's this whole discussion, well, now you're on a Sabbath day, and are you allowed to be burning? Maybe, but you don't necessarily have to, because if morning begins before the sunrise, you could, and once it starts getting into that morning period, you start burning it up before the sun rises and the day begins and we hit Shabbat. I said in part 2 of the video that I made previously that it wouldn't matter, but I guess it kind of does in what I'm describing now, because if some of the lamb or meat is left until morning. It is still before the day. We're entering the morning then before the day starts and the Sabbath begins. So you can begin to burn it in that morning period of time before you hit the next day. And you avoid the Sabbath in that way. That'd be good. But if the morning still includes, and if the intent is once the sun has set or risen and you're in the next day, you got to burn. Okay, then you'd be working on the Sabbath, because when the sun comes up, when the sun rises, that's when we start the 15th and the high Sabbath of the 15th. And then we move on to some more instructions about how you eat it in haste with sandals on your feet, etc. And then he describes in verse 12 how he's going to pass through the land of Mitzrayim that night and shall smite all the firstborn in the land of Mitzrayim, both man and beast, and on all the mighty ones of Mitzrayim I shall execute judgment. Well, that night, if you're going sunrise to sunrise, remains the 14th. It remains the Pesach or the Passover. It makes sense. He's going to pass over. We've got the blood on the land, on the doorpost and the lintel, and we're inside eating the Passover meal on Passover, the day that he passes over, which is the 14th. If you're going sunset to sunset, we're already in the 15th, and we're on the first day of Matzah, or first day of unleavened bread. And he's not even passing over on the Passover day, and we're not even eating the Passover meal on the Passover. We're now eating it on the day after Passover. It makes no sense. It makes no sense unless we're going morning to morning. All right, then we and the blood shall be a sign for you on the houses where you are. When I see the blood, I shall pass over you. Again, the Passover needs to be on the 14th, but according to what Sean is sharing, it's got to be on the 15th. Makes no sense. And let the plague not come on you to destroy you when I smite the land of Mitzrayim on this day. And this day shall become to you a remembrance, and you shall observe it as a festival to Yahweh throughout your generations. Observe it as a festival, an everlasting law. 7 days. Now this is where, and this is one of the points that, and I'll get into it, where Sean is arguing that we have an issue with eating 7 days of unleavened bread when we include eating the first day with unleavened bread. And I'll explain that a little more, but let's read verse 15. 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread. Indeed, on the first day you cause leaven to cease from your houses. So you remove it. Whoever eats leavened bread from the first day until the 7th day, that being shall be cut off from Israel. So 7 days you shall eat. 7 days. Measured from when? Well, I think it's measured from, because that's what we get into, the Feast of Matzah, the Feast of Unleavened Bread, that begins, in my mind, on the very next day when it ends. When the sun comes up, we're starting that. We have 7 days where we eat unleavened bread, the day after Passover. According to Sean and those using the sunset, we're already in the 7 days, because we're already in the Feast of Matzah, Feast of Passover, or not Passover, Feast of Unleavened Bread. Okay, and on the first day is a Kodesh gathering, and on the 7th day of a Kodesh gathering. So these are Sabbaths. This is the high Sabbath. This is the day that I will contend Yahushua was actually crucified. He actually ate this Passover meal that night, and then the next day on the high Sabbath, according to the Zadokian calendar that they were using, which is the Enoch calendar, would have been crucified on the Sabbath day, the high Sabbath. Now we know that the Jews were observing a different calendar, so the next day was going to be their high Sabbath, and that night was going to be the beginning of it. It was them living on Sean's calendar, and I'm describing what I believe Yahushua was living on, which is the Zadokian or Enochian calendar from sunup. Okay. And you shall guard the Matzah, for on the same day I brought your divisions out of the land of Mitzrayim, and you shall guard this day throughout your generations, an everlasting law. Now, verse 18, and he does, and we're going to go back to Sean's version for this. Verse 18, and this is where it begins to define for us some things. In the first, on the 14th day of the month, in the evening, you shall eat unleavened bread until the 21st day of the month in the evening. For 7 days, I'll go ahead and read 19. For 7 days no leaven is to be found in your houses. For if anyone eats what is leavened, that same being shall be cut off from the congregation of Israel, whether a sojourner or native of the land. So Sean is conflating this, as they all do, as people will do. Because of this command, where on the 14th day in the evening you shall eat unleavened bread, because they're being commanded to eat unleavened bread, they're conflating it with the 7 days that they are to observe as the Feast of Matzah, the Moedim, Feast of Unleavened Bread, where we are commanded to eat 7 days. So they think they're saying that only 7 days to eat unleavened bread, because that's what it says right here. For 7 days, no leavened bread is eaten. But that is not necessarily what's happening. In fact, I'm going to contend that it isn't what's happening, because the first meal they eat is going to be in the evening after they've slaughtered the lamb between the twilights, and then they're preparing it into the evening in their eating, sometime beginning in the twilight hours into the night, and through the first and second watch of the night they're to be eating this first and second part of the night. They're to be eating. So they're celebrating and eating the Passover meal on the 14th during the night in the first and second parts of the night. And that evening, starting in that evening when they're eating that meal, whether they're eating it with the meal or not, I would say, based upon what we're reading here, once the evening hits on the 14th, you need to eat unleavened bread. In fact, it's telling you to eat unleavened bread. I don't think it's saying, if you eat bread, make it unleavened. It is saying you shall eat unleavened bread. But is that an 8th day that we eat unleavened bread? I think it is, because it's not part of these 7 days. I don't believe. Otherwise, it would be, they can be run together, but then we literally have 8 days of eating unleavened bread, according to Exodus 12, 18, and 19. And there's nothing, while Sean may use this as an argument that I'm adding something, I suppose, but in the same breath that he is saying that, he has to understand what all he's adding to make his evening to evening work. He's having to interpret and read into it. He's eisegeting into it so that he can get to where he needs to be, going evening to evening. If I am eisegeting, which means I'm reading into Scripture, an 8th day of eating unleavened bread, okay. But it seems to make sense in this environment, because we can eat unleavened bread and not have it be part of the Feast of Unleavened Bread. The Feast of Unleavened Breads is 7 days, and we are to eat unleavened bread on those days. This unleavened bread here may be part of those 7 days, but it doesn't have to be. John contends that it is, and I'm saying it probably doesn't. But we clearly have this command that we shall eat unleavened bread from the evening of the 14th until the 21st day in the evening. Once the evening ends, in Sean's economy, once the evening ends, first of all, the evening would be the first part of the 24th. We measure as 21st. It's already come and gone before the daylight period of the 21st. In my economy, it would be at the end of the day. So let's go to the calendar and try to make this real. So what we're saying is, according to Exodus 26, actually, let me go back here. The first day is Kodesh gathering, and the 7 days. Okay, so let me go back to the calendar. I'm sorry. So here we have the sacrifice of the lamb and taking place on this day, and then the eating of the Passover lamb during the evening and night that follows. The question is whether or not that evening and night belongs to the 14th or belongs to the 15th. John says it belongs to the 15th. I say it belongs to the 14th. But no matter what, it appears that we need to start eating unleavened bread here. But technically, if Sean is correct and the day begins at evening, the evening on the 14th, this is not it. The evening of the 14th occurred over here at the end of the daylight period hours of the 13th. So if we're going to eat it on the 14th, if we are going to, on the 14th of the month, in the evening on the 14th, and if Sean is correct, that's over here, because this is the evening. It's the first thing that happens in a day. By the time we get to the evening at the end of the daylight period of the 14th, which is the end of the 14th, we're into the 15th, which Sean contends is what happens. But you have this problem with these scriptures, because now when it says you're going to eat that unleavened bread in the evening on the 14th, that's over here, and you begin eating unleavened bread on the the end of the day on the 13th. And Sean's going to have where he says going morning to morning creates an 8th day of eating unleavened bread, which I agree. So does going evening to evening. He just hasn't thought of it that way, in my opinion, because you've got this day here. And then the command is, after we eat in this evening, for 7 days we are to eat unleavened bread. And here we've got the festival of Matzah, which is the festival of unleavened bread. And for 7 days, starting on the 15th, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 on the 21st. So let's take these commands that we're reading in the Yah scriptures, where we are to eat in the evening on the 14th, we're to eat unleavened bread. And then we're to eat unleavened bread until the evening of the 21st. Well, let's walk that through. If Sean is correct and his day started here, he's got the first evening, he's eating unleavened bread here. Then he would have the first day of Matzah, where he's eating unleavened bread here, day 2. And he has this day, day 3, this day, day 4, this day, day 5, this day, day 6, this day, day 7th, and then he has this day, day 8. Because at the end of the daylight hours of the 20th would be the evening and the start of the 21st day. So by the time we're waking up on the 21st to observe this day, the second half of the day, we've already had the evening. And we're no longer needing to eat unleavened bread. We wouldn't technically have to eat unleavened bread in the daylight hours of this because we've gone past the evening of the 21st. But we still have 8. And that was one of the problems Sean is saying. It would be the 1st, the 2nd, the 3rd, the 4th, the 5th, the 6th, the 7th, the 8th. And we haven't even gotten to what would be the 21st day. But he's saying that we have a problem with 8 days because the command is that we will, let's move away from Sean's evening to evening and go back to my morning to morning, sunrise to sunrise. My day of the 14th starts here on the 14th. And I have to kill the lamb between those twilight hours. And then once it's twilight, I begin to share in the Passover meal, twilight into the night. And that meal is to be eaten with unleavened bread. This is an unleavened bread eating. And is that part of the Festival of Matzah? I don't think it is. It's still part of Passover. But we're eating unleavened bread on Passover. So not only do we eat unleavened bread for 7 days in the Feast of Unleavened Breads, we eat unleavened bread on the Passover, which gives us the 8th day. So we eat here unleavened bread for the Passover. And we eat all night long through the second part of the night. And in Jubilees, I think we even get into the third part of the night. Jubilees talks about what day that part belongs to. And we'll talk about that in a moment when we get to Jubilees. But so in how I'm reading it, you have, again, I'm going to repeat it. I'm sorry. We're going to kill the lamb during the day. We're going to prepare them. And we're going to eat it in the twilight. We're going to eat it through the night. And then as twilight is beginning and we're eating, and morning is approaching, or the next day is approaching, we're getting into the twilight of the morning hours, beginning of daylight. Everything that's left over we need to be getting rid of. I think probably today, which is probably a difference between this making of this video and the making of part 2 of the last video. I think we are supposed to be destroying probably the leftover meat into the morning hours before the sunrise begins, and then we get into the Sabbath. Because when the sun comes up, we are now in the 7-day festival of unleavened bread, the festival of Matzah, the Feast of Unleavened Breads, which is the high Sabbath. And then we celebrate it for 7 days. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Now, according to Exodus 12:18, we're to eat unleavened bread until the evening of the 21st. And in my economy, you're going to experience the first part of the 21st all the way through that day and into the evening. And then actually through the night even. It's still all going to be the 21st. Okay, so it fits, but the problem of 8 days occurs in both occasions, and both Exodus 12:6 and Exodus 12:10 and 12:18 and 19 all seem to fit better in a sunrise to sunrise morning or a day definition of a day period than it does an evening to. Okay, and before I move off, let's just go to Sean's version of 12:18. He didn't address 12:10 here, but he did address 12:18. And this is how his version reads. In the first month, on the 14th day of the month, at evening, you shall eat unleavened bread. So again, using his version. Well, let's just finish. Until the 21st day of the month at evening. His version is agreeing that he's basically saying at evening on the 14th, which would have begun over here. I'm saying at evening here. He's saying at evening here. And then it runs until I say the evening here on the 21st, and he says at the evening here at the end of the day on the 20th, which is the beginning of the 21st, which is when his new day begins. And that's when evening, again, in his way of thinking, evening comes first all the time. By the time you get to evening at the end of the daylight period of the 21st, it will be the 22nd. So it isn't just the Yah scriptures, it's his version that he's sharing as well. Okay, so here Sean has moved off into Jubilees 49, verses 1 and 2. And I'm going to read it for you rather than let him reading it for you, because I'm going to read it faster than he did. And I'm not sure what version he is reading from, but let me just read it to you. It's like this. Jubilees 49, 1 through 2. Remember the commandment which the Lord commanded thee concerning the Passover, that you should celebrate it in its season on the 14th of the first month, that you should kill it before it is evening, and that they should eat it by night on the evening of the 15th, from the time of the setting of the sun. For on this night, the beginning of the festival and the beginning of the joy, you were eating the Passover in Egypt, when all the powers of Mastema had been let loose to slay all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh to the firstborn of the captive maidservant in the mill, and to the cattle. Okay, so what's really important here are a number of things, but this is his version. But I will also say, I'm not arguing with his version. I think it's come from the Ethiopic text. I think this is, if you go and find most of your Jubilees versions, they will all read this way. Not all of them, but most of them will. And I think it's because most of them are being translated from the oldest stuff they had at the time. And maybe, I don't really know, but it seems to be coming from in fact, let me just go there now very quickly and pull it over here real quick, because this is probably one of the most well-known translators of these extra biblical writings, the parabiblical writings, I should say, is this R.H. Charles. And he writes a little bit more like the King James because it goes back in time. Do we have a date in here? It goes back in time, but he's well respected as a translator. And he's basically saying it comes from the Ethiopic text. He is translating from the editor's Ethiopic text. All of them. I've got another one. Let's see if I have it up still. Here's another version. This is this his? This might be his. Let's see if I can find. Okay, here's another translation of the Jubilees from, let me see if I can get to the beginning. George Shoddy, I guess. But it's clear that he is translating also from the Ethiopic. So they're all translating from the Ethiopic. And I don't, that's fine. I have great respect for the Ethiopic text. They have saved us from losing all these scriptures for all these years. They've kept them out there and available. In recent years, it's become obviously more important. But to go back to what Sean is saying and how these versions read, and it has been troubling to me. It's saying that the Passover is to be celebrated by killing the Passover before it is evening on the 14th. It's to be celebrated on the 14th. So it needs to be killed before it is evening. Okay, so if Sean is correct, what he's saying is it needs to be killed during the 14th, which would be during the daylight hours, because at the end of the daylight hours of the 14th, we have the evening, we have the 15th. So if you were to wait until evening, you'd be killing it on the 15th. So I guess that still kind of fits, he would have to say that the lamb needs, based upon this, the lamb has to be killed during the daylight hours, and which I agree with him. Overwhelming evidence suggests. So he says it has to be killed on the 14th before it is evening, and with this evening we transfer to the 15th, and that they should eat it by night on the evening of the 15th from the time of the setting of the sun. That's pretty prominent, pretty straightforward in my opinion. You could read that the 15th gets measured with the setting of the sun, and by the time they're eating it after they've slaughtered it on the 14th, that they're eating it by night on the evening. To pull this back up, this is, according to Jubilees 49, they've got to kill the lamb before it's evening, before this time. And then we have at sunset the eating of the lamb, which is now, according to Jubilees 49, 1 and 2 in their translations, this is the 15th. So we're already in the 15th during this period of time. And that seems pretty evident in that passage. Let's see if there's anything. I don't really think the rest of it needs to be read, but let me pause here for a second. Okay, and forgive me for redundancy. I will just assert again, this translation, this version seems pretty straightforward, and it troubles one if you're trying to make any other. I mean, would be evidence for an evening to evening, clear evidence for an evening to evening. But let me submit to you that I found other translations that don't translate this way. And I'm not going to rebuild it. I did it in the second part of what I did, where I actually went and tried to find and was successful finding a Masoretic, by appearances. I shouldn't say that because I don't know that for a fact, but it looked like block text. So it would have been like the Masoretic. But whatever it is, it was Hebrew. And I could take that Hebrew of this passage, and I can't remember the place. It was from a website where I got it, and I took the Hebrew and I put it over into Google Translate and came up with a translation. And I would just say it was not conclusive. It seems easy to, the way it was written, it would be easy to over translate or under translate or translate according to how you are already thinking things are, because I'm going to suggest to you that all these folks were already being influenced by the Jewish influence that the day began at sunset, that they began to pass along, I think, at 175 BC. So they were already operating from this. And if this is what they were, how they were thinking, and got to this passage and it was hard to translate, they would translate it according to their understanding of the time. Now, I get that I'm reading into that, and I'm not trying to excuse it away. We have these problems in translation. And if I took this passage all by itself, okay, great. But I would tell you there are other translations that didn't come to the same conclusion that I'm going to go share with you in a second, which I already did in the second part too. I'm sorry if it'll be redundant, but we just need to address it here. And then we need to move on to some more passages in 49 that will dispute this. It will put us back to an obvious morning to morning, which I will be sharing with you in this video too. So again, let me just say, I'm not trying to undermine this translation. I do not know. But I am saying that while it's evident, it could be wrong. And I think when I pose it against everything else, my conclusion is when I add everything up together, including some additional translations where they didn't translate in this manner, I'm back to morning to morning, sunrise to sunrise, and that this is a one-off. This is a poor translation. And poor is the wrong word. Let's say errant. I just don't think it was translated correctly, and I think there's good cause for them to not translate correctly, because I think the Hebrew was not clear by appearances to me, although I'm not a Hebrew translator, so forgive me, I'm not trying to be an expert in any of this. I'm trying to argue. So with that, let me go to the Yah scriptures and read for you in Yah scriptures how this very same passage reads. It reads like this: remember the command which Yahweh commanded you concerning the Pesach, that you should celebrate it in its season on the 14th of the first month, that you should kill it before it is evening. So far, all the same, all good. But then he goes on to read, and that they should eat it by night in the evening. It doesn't say from the time of the setting of the sun, but it doesn't say anything about the 15th here. And I think there's good cause for that. So they're basically, if you were reading this, you would not, it would read differently for you because it has nothing to do with a transfer into the 15th. Let me go back. Well, here, let me read it to you again. That you should celebrate it in its season on the 14th of the first month, that you should kill it before it is evening, and that they should eat it by night in the evening from the time of the setting of the sun. So they're to begin eating in the setting of the sun, which there's nothing in here that suggests we've moved off of day 14 yet. There's nothing here in this scripture that suggests we're not still in the 14th. We're in the 14th at sunset, still part of the day. Now we're entering the first part of the night or the fourth part of the day, but it's still all part of the 14th day. Again, juxtaposed against how it reads here, that they should eat it by night on the evening of the 15th. So what they're introducing in here is they should eat it by night, and instead of saying in the evening, it says on the evening of the 15th. This is what is new, and this is what is translated. Let me go to the R.H. Charles translation for that. Give me a second to get there. And let me just take a moment here to just say, I'm sorry. I meant this to be a short video. It's not. I just keep finding things. It keeps rolling into more information. I'm just sorry. It's not going to be short. But here I'm going to R.H. Charles. And why am I going there? It's because I don't know who Sean's reading from. It really doesn't matter. I could grab any number of them. But I'm going to grab R.H. Charles because probably of all of them, he's got as much cred as anybody, so as much credibility as anybody. And this is how he wrote it. Chapter 49 of Jubilees. Remember the commandment which the Lord commanded thee concerning the Passover, that thou shouldst celebrate it in its season on the 14th of the first month, that thou shouldst kill it before it is evening, and that they should eat it by night on the evening of the 15th from the time of the setting of the sun. So R.H. Charles is introducing the 15th. So there's good reason why Sean is reading this and seeing this and thinking he needs to accommodate this. There are reasons why, and I'm headed there, that we don't accommodate this. I think this needs to accommodate the rest of it. I'm going to pause. No, I'm not going to pause here. I am going to go grab. There's one more version that I grabbed, RST&E. First of all, let me say I'm pretty confident that the Yah scriptures are translating from similar texts that R.H. Charles and these guys are. Came to a different conclusion. I'm pretty confident. I know that the Chris CJ I can't think of his name right now. The guy that wrote the foundational scriptures that has become the Yah scriptures and the scriptures and some of the other things. It's the foundational translation that CJ did. He worked from, in the old writings, he worked from the Masoretic text like the rest of them. So he translated from the same documents that all of our other scriptures have translated from. And I think that would be true of the translations he did in the extra writings, the parabiblical writings that would include Jubilee. So I think probably when we read the Yah scriptures, it would be based upon the Ethiopic writings as well, but a different conclusion with how it should translate. There is a gentleman I wouldn't know about the gentleman. There is a gentleman and a group of people who are producing the RST&E, which is the restored. Not sure exactly what those acronyms are for. It doesn't really matter. That's not the point. But I want to read how they are using the Ethiopic text, but they're also using the Septuagint. They are using, which, by the way, the Ethiopic text, I believe are also based upon the Septuagint as well. So I think it's all related, that Septuagint and the Ethiopic text. But he would draw in other things. But here's how he translated that same passage. And I could pull it up on screen, but I have to go find it. It's just more. Let me just read it to you. Chapter 48 of Jubilees. And in the 6th year of the 3rd week of the 49th Yovel, which is the Jubilees, you did depart. Oops, I'm in 48. Forgive me. Sorry. Let me get to the 49th. 49. Remember the mitzvah, which is the command. Remember the mitzvah, which I, Yahweh, commanded you concerning the Pesach, which is the Passover, that you should celebrate it in its season on the 14th of the first Kodesh, that you should kill it before it is evening, and that they should eat it by Lila, which is night, on the same evening to the 15th from the time of the setting of the Shemesh. So that's very critical. It doesn't say you eat it on the evening of the 15th. It says you are to eat it by night in the evening to the 15th until the period of time that approaches. To pull this back over, um, it would read, "We are to kill it kill it in the day before it is evening, and then eat it in the evening and by night to the day of the 15th, which starts over here." So it all needs to be finished and accomplished and over. Probably going back to what we were saying about the Sabbath, probably everything that's left over into this third part of the night needs to start being destroyed. You're not going to eat it. It needs to be gone probably by sunrise. I tell you, that makes the most sense to me when you look at Exodus and the rest of what I'm going to get to in Jubilees. This makes the most sense that there's either no mention of the 15th, or we're saying that we're eating in the evening and night to the 15th, not on the 15th. Although I acknowledge you can pick up translation after translation after translation of the Jubilees, chapter 49, that will lead you to say that you're eating on the 15th. All of this darkness period of time is already. Okay, and so here we reach Jubilees 49:10, and he did include it. That's good. But again, I'm going to read it for him rather than him read. And I think I'm making his case in all of this. I'm trying to be fair to his case. Let me just read it. Let the children of Jubilees 49:10 through 12. Let the children of Israel come and observe the Passover on the day of its fixed time, on the 14th day of the first month, between the evenings, from the third part of the day to the third part of the night. For 2 portions of the day are given to the light, and a third part to the evening. This is that which the Lord commanded thee, that thou shouldst observe it between the evenings. And I'll go ahead and finish it. And it is not permissible to slay it during any period of the light, but during the period bordering on the evening, and let them eat it at the time of the evening until the third part of the night, and whatever is left over of all of it from the third part of the night onwards, let them burn it with fire. So this is like the Exodus commands. Well, let's break this down, and I think he does as well, but let's break this down. So if I pull this back over again and we read it against this scripture, well, actually, even before I do that, let me go to the Yah scriptures and read that just real quick. Let me see if I can get it pulled up fast here. So let's get to verse 10. Okay. Let the children of Israel come and observe the Pesach on the day of its appointed time, on the 14th day of the first month, between the evenings, from the third part of the day to the third part of the night. For 2 portions of the day are given to the light, and a third part given to the evening. This is that which Yahweh commanded you, that you should observe it between the evenings. And it is not permissible to slay it during any period of the light, but during the period bordering on the evening, and let them eat it at the time of the evening until the third part of the night, and whatever is left over of all of its flesh from the third part of the night and onwards, let him burn it with fire. And here's R.H. Charles' rendering of it. Let the children of Israel come and observe the Passover on the day of its fixed time, on the 14th day of the first month, between the evenings, from the third part of the day to the third part of the night. For 2 portions of the day are given to the light, and a third part to the evening. This is that which the Lord commanded thee, that thou shouldst observe it between the evenings. And it is not permissible to slay it during any period of the light, but during the period bordering on the evening, and let them eat it at the time of the evening until the third part of the night, and whatever is left over of all its flesh from the third part of the night and onwards, let them burn it with fire. Okay, that agrees. Let me do one more rendering of it. And actually, let me get this down because I don't want you to be. What I'm going to be reading from is the RSTNE, and see how they rendered it. It reads like this, and I don't have it up on the screen, so don't try to read along with it. If you read along with it, you're just going to be reading Sean's version that he's got. So the RSTNE reads like this: Let the children of Yasharel come and observe the Pesach on the Yom, which is day of its fixed time, on the 14th Yom of the first Chodesh, which is month, between the evenings, Bayin Har Ar Bayim, from the third part. What would that be? Between the evenings and in the evenings from the third part of the day to the third part of the night. So that must be his rendering of that. Bayin Har. It's not really helping us, is it? Bayin Har Arbayim, from the third part of the Yom to the third part of the Lila. I'm not sure. For 2 portions of the Yom are given to the Or, which is the day, and a third part are given to the light. Actually, Or is light. Yom is day, Or is light. So 2 parts are given to the light and a third part given to the evening. This is that which Yahweh commanded you, that you should observe it between the evenings. Bayin Ha Arbayim again. Okay. I'm not sure what they're doing there. And it is not permissible to slay it during the period of the light, it's not permissible to slay it during any period of the Or, which is light, but during the period bordering on the evening, and let them eat it at the time of the evening until the third part of the Lila, and which is night. And whatever is left over of all its flesh from the third part of the Lila and onwards, let them burn it with fire. So really, all 4 of the renditions are basically saying the same thing. But let me pull in our illustration here and let's think this through. First of all, it reads, let the children of Israel come and observe it on the 14th day. So the first thing we're doing, let me pull up the calendar. The first thing we're saying is that we're going to observe it on the 14th day, not the 13th and not the 15th. We're observing it on the 14th day. That's the command, the 14th day of the first month, between the evenings. And so what does that mean? Here's the one evening, and this would actually belong to the previous day. This is the twilight before the sun comes up. And so it appears, and I think we all agree, that it is to be slaughtered between the evenings, between this time and that time. Fixed time between the evenings. To observe the Passover on the day of its fixed time, on the 14th day of the first month, between the evenings. So what does it mean to even celebrate the Passover? Does all of the Passover include just killing of the lamb? Because that's what we understand from Exodus. And that's what it just said, between the evenings. What it just said in Jubilees is that we are to observe the Passover between the evenings. Is Jubilees telling us that we are only observing the Passover during the daylight hours here? Maybe, but I don't think so, because I think we have all the other scriptures that are telling us that the Passover includes the preparing of the dinner, the eating of it, and then the actual passing over during in Egypt. That's what it's reading here, is that the Passover is to be observed on the 14th between the evenings. So to go back to our calendar, we would say the 14th is what we're reading so far is that it's to be observed on the 14th between sunup, or between twilight and before the sun comes up here, and between sundown and twilight here. So it's got to be observed during the daylight hours of this day. And but then it also goes on to say between the evenings from the third part of the day to the third part of the night. So coming back to this, it's saying that this would be the third part of the day, and this would be the third part of the night over here. So to the left over here, we've got the first part of the day here, the second part of the day here, the third part of the day here. This is the third part of the day, and this is the third part of the night. So what did we just read? From the third part of the day, between the evenings, from the third part of the day to the third part of the night. So let's go back to what we just showed you, and I was questioning, are we saying then that the Passover is celebrated on the 14th only during the daylight hours from this twilight to this twilight? But that's not what we just read. What did we just read? I mean, that's what, if we just stop here, and forgive me if I'm dragging this out, but we read this first sentence, and it's to be observed on the 14th day between the evenings, and that could be between these 2 evenings and during this daylight hour. But we get more clarification to follow. Because what does it say? From the third part of the day to the third part of the night. And what is that? Here's the third part of the day, and here's the third part of the night. So it just said we're to observe it between the evenings on the 14th, between the third part of the day, and the third part of the night. Well, that would be from here to here. So that's not even the daylight period. So the observance of Passover on the 14th does not even occur during the daylight hours. It occurs, and if it does have any daylight hours, it's from the third part of the day where we might have some waning sun before it goes down into the twilight and into the third part of the night and before the morning. But it's clear if we're reading this that we are to observe the Passover on the 14th day of the month between the evenings, but the evenings they're talking about are the ones that start in the third part of the day and run to the third part of the night. So he's talking about between these two evenings, between this twilight and this twilight. During this period of time is the observance of the Passover meal. So in my economy, and by economy meaning from sunrise to sunrise, we have the 14th starting here. We are to kill, and we have the daylight periods of the 14th. Here being the sunrise, if you can't see what I'm pointing at. We have the day beginning, and we have the sunlight periods, and we're to kill the lamb before it is evening during the sunlight hours. And then from the third part of that 14th day of the day, which belongs to, it will go on to say, in fact, let me do it now. For 2 portions of the day are given to the light, and a third part given to the evening. So Jubilees is also saying that the third part of this day is given to the evening, and this third part is considered part of this evening. So we really need to be slaughtering the lamb before we even get to the evening part of this third day, it sounds like to me. But it all begins here, starting in the evening and running to the third part of the night. So the actual Passover, the observance of the Passover, is really a nighttime observance. It's a nighttime from the waning of the day on the 14th through the night of the 14th and to the 15th. That is what it sure seems to be saying to me. Let the children of Israel come and observe the Passover on the day of its fixed time, on the 14th day of the first month, between the evenings, from the third part of the day to the third part of the night. So the last part of the day to the last part of the night, for 2 portions of the day are given to the light, and a third part to the evening. So let's pull up our calendar here. And the way this would work is, what it's saying is we are to observe it on the 14th. And we have the daylight hours of the 14th where we are to kill the lamb. And then we have the third part of the day coming. And the third part of the day belongs to the evening. And so from that evening and into that evening, we are to observe from this third part of the day all the way into the third part of the night and before the morning of, to the morning of the 15th. So all of that fits in my economy, from sunrise to sunrise. It all fits in there. But let's say that Sean is correct. How would that play out? Because remember what Sean is saying. The evening of the 14th is the first part of the day, and it occurs over here at the end of the 13th day. So if we get to the third part, if we were to apply what Jubilees 49:10 is saying to what Sean is saying, we have, here, let's go back. So we've got this, it's got to take place between the evenings from the third part of the day to the third part of the night. Well, how does that fit? Third part of the day follows us into the evening here. So to get to the evening of the 14th, the third part of the day has to be talking about the third part of the 13th. I hope you can follow me there. So the third part of the day, in these daylight hours of the 13th, before evening, before sunset occurs, and we change according to Sean and those who hold to this position, before we change, we're into the third part of the day. So the third part of the day and the evening of the 14th is happening here at the end of the 13th day. Because the evening, the sun sets, and we go through the first and second parts of the night of the 14th, which is the first thing that happens on this day, before we even get to the daylight hours of the 14th, where this lamb must be slaughtered. So it just can't work if you follow what I'm saying. If you're following Jubilees 49:10, when it says from the third part of the day to the third part of the night on the 14th, if Sean is correct, we're talking about this day, at the end of this day, and this whole period of time from the evening here to the beginning parts of this. And then we get to the daylight hours. Just it just doesn't work. I don't know how you can get there. And I'm not sure how we would build. If he heard this, I'm not sure he's ever heard this. I don't know what he's doing with this or if he's really reasoned this out. And if he's got a better answer than I'm giving for this, fine. I need to hear it because I don't hear it in his video here. I don't hear it anywhere in what he's saying. Now, I will say, I'll just comment to it, but it's not germane to this discussion of the daylight. It is that it says that it's not permissible to slay it during any period of light. Now, I do not quite, again, this might be a translation problem. I don't know, and I haven't investigated it. But that'd be like saying that you can't slay the lamb in the first part of the day here because we have light, and you can't slay it in the twilight because we have light. So you'd be slaying it at night here. So I'm not sure that translation could be correct because we're supposed to be eating it from sunset and into the night. So when it says we have to slay it, when it says we have to slay it, and it's not permissible to slay it during any period of the light, but during the period bordering on the evening. Well, what is bordering on the evening? If we define the third part of the day belongs to the evening, then what's bordering would be this part of the day, but that's daylight. And what's bordering on the evening would be this part of the night, but that's night. And that would qualify for that, but then we can't start eating it at sunset because we haven't hit the border of the evening here. So it's conflicting and confusing. And I'm not sure what to do with it or what would be correct. I think we must have some issues with the translation. And then they are to eat it at the time of the evening until the third part of the night. So again, looking at the illustration, we're to eat it in the evening at sunset. Confirm it. Let them eat it at the time of evening until the third part of the night. Let him eat it. Third part of the evening. Let him eat him at the time of the evening until the third part of the night, whatever is left over. Okay. All right. So that would be basically the time of evening, whether it's starts here or starts here or starts here. We're to eat it from the time of the evening until the third part of the night, and then we start cleaning up basically the third part of the night. That's what it's saying in Jubilees. We are eating it on into the third part of the night. If Sean is correct, we're eating it on the 15th, and he does argue for that. He says we're already in it, and this would be the first of the Feast of Unleavened Bread meals. I'm saying it's not the first of unleavened bread meals because it's not the 15th yet. It's still the 14th, and this meal, which is to be eaten with unleavened bread, is not the first of the 7 days. It's just another day we need to eat, which is the Passover that we are to eat with unleavened bread. And that all of the instruction that it's all happening from the third part of the day to the third part of the night on the 14th is suggestive that that meal is being eaten on the 14th and not the 15th. I know I'm beating it hard. I'm being redundant as I'm saying it, but I'm just saying that it really cannot work. This passage, Jubilees 49:10, I don't see how it can be harmonized with this same rendering of Jubilees 1 and 2, where it says that we are to be eating it by night on the evening of the 15th from the time of the setting of the sun. I agree that we should be eating it by night in the evening from the time of the setting of the sun, because that's the second, that's eating it from the third part of the day to the third part of the night. But I don't agree that that is on the 15th. And this on the evening of the 15th is what's confusing everybody. But this can't be harmonized with the very next, the 49:10, where it's saying that we're eating, it's to be celebrated on the 14th day of the month, between the evenings from the third part of the day into the third part of the night, which would be in the nighttime, and which, according to Sean, must be the 15th, and according to Jubilees 49:1 and 2, must be the 15th. So it can't be harmonized. We've got issues with translation. We have to have issues with translation. And I will say that the Yah scriptures, we don't have issue with translation because they didn't include the language in one in verses 2 where it says on the evening of the 15th. It doesn't say that, so we don't have to harmonize it. And now I have my scriptures, both 49:1 and 2 and 49:10 through 12, harmonized. They are just fine. Same with the RST and E scriptures when it says we are to eat it in the evening from in the evening from the time of the setting sun to the 15th can be harmonized with this. It does harmonize. It makes scriptures work. What Sean is reading and that rendering, that translation cannot harmonize one against the other. You're going to have to decide which one of those two makes sense in what you're doing. If Sean does successfully think he's made sense of this, I would need to hear more. I need to hear more because I can't. All right, so I felt compelled. I felt compelled to try to re-explain this as I did in the second part, but to spend more time and to try to be more clear in how I am parsing it out in this discussion of when a day begins. So I'll end it here and thank you. And again, I'm sorry it took so long to get along.